Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone. I think I should probably introduce myself because many of you in the community probably haven't heard from me yet. But I am Blockchain Jeffrey Elliott. I am one of the new community managers here at Trilitech, and you'll be hearing from me quite a lot. Just to give you a little bit background, I've been in Web3 for about 7 years in various community oriented roles. And yeah, now I'm here. But yeah, let's get kicked off. We're joined by Nico, as I mentioned, the head of DeFi here at Trilitech. And yeah, Nico, would you like to give us a bit of a background about yourself, your role, and yeah?
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. It's actually interesting that you've been in the space for 7 years. I didn't know that myself.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, on my side, maybe I'll do a small intro on my own if, in case not everyone has seen one of my pieces of content, which are sparse and quite spread around so far. So I joined Trilitech 6 months ago, roughly. And Trilitech, for those of you guys, even in the wider community, is essentially like an equivalent of Tezos labs in other ecosystems. Together with Nomadic Labs, we're co-developing, helping to develop the new parts of the blockchain, and we're working on adoption and spreading the word on what the Tezos blockchain should be used for, and the upcoming newer chain called Etherlink, which is a layer 2 rolling up to Tezos, coming up very shortly. So I joined 6 months ago, and the role here and the goal really is to actually get some DeFi activity properly going on Tezos, more than we've had before, and also in a more innovative and sort of thinking out of the box way. We do want to have some of the things that are happening in other ecosystems, and with the introduction of Etherlink and therefore an EVM pass to builders, that's made quite simple actually compared to before. But we also have an ambition to actually do a lot more and contribute to making the space more useful in general and more vibrant. And what I mean by that is doing things that are related to real world components, like having DeFi and Block3 components in new apps that only leverage blockchain as opposed to being all about blockchain, and having some users who use it without really knowing what blockchain is about, knowing every single element of the stack, having to install a MetaMask and trying to do their seed phrasing on a piece of paper and all of this. And that's essentially what we have been hard at work doing with the team here, the DeFi team and the wider teams at Trilitech, Nomadic Labs, and the smaller entity we have in APAC called TZ APAC.
Brilliant. Thanks for that introduction. And yeah, let's get kicked off with the questions. We have a few community questions to go into. So I suppose the first question that we have is, what are the unique advantages of building DeFi applications on Tezos compared to other platforms?
Yeah, so there's two parts to that answer, really. One part is the historical one, which is already live, already open for business, available, and all that, which is the Tezos layer 1 itself, the Tezos chain that most people would be familiar with. On the Tezos chain, one of the components of it, the whole idea that the co-founders had at the beginning and is living to this day, is the idea of security built in from the get-go in the smart contracts that get deployed on that Tezos layer 1. And that's this idea of you see this in various ways, from the way Michelson, which is a smart contract language on Tezos, to any of the higher level languages that essentially get transpiled into Michelson, Lego, MLego, JS Lego, SmartPy, and so on. The idea was really to have a very secure environment that would almost guarantee, and nothing is a guarantee really, but almost guarantee that there is no clear bug in the code, with formal verification and a bunch of things that were designed from the ground up for this. That's an advantage of it. It does come with having to learn potentially new tools for people who haven't been building in one of those languages in the past, and some of the tool stack around those, people would be familiar on this call probably even more than I do, like Taquito, and interacting with wallets that are a bit different in their structure, like Kukai and Tempo and things like that. And the advantage really on the Tezos ecosystem that exists today, and frankly has existed for a year and a half in the current sort of form, is security from the get-go, and reusing some of the elements that have been built in the ecosystem by other brave pioneers, like Uves and ColdFi and Plenty and so on. On the EVM side, because we're trying to expand quite a bit the audience that we're catering to, and on the EVM side, with Etherlink currently being launched, the testnet is fairly stable. And I saw a tweet earlier today or yesterday saying that it was quite stable now and that the EVM compatibility had sort of been done. And later on in the roadmap, you also have Justice, which is a JavaScript-based rollup. But essentially with those, the entire goal is to have access to that community, which is fairly large at this point, of Solidity builders. I would say VM, but at the end of the day, Viper is nowhere near where EVM is at the moment, and Solidity is at the moment. And those Solidity builders with all of those tools that have been built by third parties like Alchemy and ThirdWeb and the Ethos.js team and Web3 before them are really, really strong tools that are like heavily battle tested at this point for some specific types of apps that are already out there. And taking a quick look at DeFi Llama right now, we can think that those types of apps on Arbitrum, for example, or on BSC or on Ethereum itself, tend to be like, broadly speaking, like 5 types of apps at most, which have been quite refined over the last 2 years, 2 years and a half, and are like fairly mature at this point. You have like 5 broad types. One is Aave, Compound, and what people call money markets in DeFi. So those actually money markets is a misnomer for those, but at the end of the day, what it means is that you can deposit a token. So let's say wrapped Bitcoin, and then based on that token being considered as a collateral, you can actually borrow another token, which obviously, like most likely, is going to be different from the one you've deposited. And it could be a stable coin linked to the dollar, like USDC or USDT. It could be, I don't know, like, wrapped Tez, wrapped Ether, and so on. You have like applications like Uniswap, which enable you to swap one token for another. And those are, in the lingo, are called spot dexes. And those, like, again, have like massively evolved over time. The latest iteration with a V4 is slated to be online by the beginning of April or something. And those again are super helpful for like giving liquidity from one token to another to people, like people would have done in Tezos with Plenty, or I believe QuipuSwap was another DEX, and it's still online and still vibrant on the Plenty side. And you have each of those have a very strong code base that is like, well audited, has been battle tested with billions of dollars in TVL and trillions of dollars in volume over the years. And essentially being able to deploy like for like those Solidity contracts, whether you're exactly doing a fork of one of those, or you're doing something more ambitious and reusing building blocks from those code repositories. A very famous one is OpenZeppelin, which is a smart contract auditing firm making an open source library of smart contracts available to everyone, for everyone to use for free. Or like newer ones like the ThirdWeb one, which unfortunately had an exploit recently, but otherwise it's really good quality, and is also linked to a very, very well designed UI UX framework, making it super easy for you, for example, to deploy embedded wallets. And that's the last thing I'm going to mention in the details is those embedded wallets. If you go to ThirdWeb right now, you are able to deploy what is essentially a smart wallet with the ThirdWeb widget designed for you, and that can be tailored and fine-tuned however you like, in literally 5 minutes on Etherlink. And that's something that, is quite secure. Again, it's experimental tech and, anything can happen, but has been audited multiple times, is being used as we speak by multiple very well-funded apps in the US, the UK, and the wider world. And is something that, is just simple to use and gets you going, essentially. So if you're a Web2 developer and you're willing to look at Web3, you have maybe some TypeScript, JavaScript experience. Maybe you don't. You have C#, which now has a syntax that is very, very similar to TypeScript. and so on, you can get going in frankly like 1 or 2 afternoons looking at Alchemy University content or anything like that in a way that is very mature at this point.
That sort of content is super helpful for devs. You know, a lot of devs struggle with finding the right place to get information, and having all of that information in somewhere like Alchemy or have third web support on that is super key. You touched on Etherlink, and we have a question actually relating to Etherlink. You kind of covered it a little bit, but perhaps you could go into a bit more detail. So, one of the questions was, what are the plans to grow the DeFi community of Tezos? Will Tezos DeFi cross into Etherlink too?
Okay, so that's a good question, but it's not a short answer. So let me just think about how to actually wrap this up in an understandable and relatively short answer. Okay, so there's a few components of this, obviously. So we do have an existing DeFi ecosystem on Tezos. That ecosystem on Tezos currently, and again, let's just go back to our friend DeFi Lama here. I look at the various apps we have on the Tezos ecosystem right now. And at the end, I'm going to exclude the Tezos liquidity baking. There might be some questions on this afterwards. And that's not an app in itself. It's more complex. But apart from that, we have Uves, we have CordFi, we have Colibri, which is still around. We have Plenty, and so on. The thing that I would say is that those apps are pure DeFi apps. And what I mean by that, DeFi, that name comes from the DeFi summer we had in 2020 on Ethereum, and it stands for decentralized finance. Now, I don't really like that name anymore for what we actually do in finance when it comes to blockchain and what me and various people on this call are doing day to day, because it's too limited compared to what we can actually do and what people are working on at the moment in various VC facilitated accelerators and various places around the world. Decentralized finance refers to a fairly closed ecosystem where you're essentially trading a value that is native to the blockchains that you're doing it on. Okay, so typically you go to Tezos right now and you go to Use, and you're going to be able to trade their U token, which is native to the Tezos blockchain, as it represents a link to the Use application and the Use protocol. Or you're going to be able to trade, and you're going to be able to trade CTES potentially in some of the others, and things like that. Those are things that take their value from the chain where they're on. And you have that exactly the same on Ethereum and its linked layer twos, where the name of the game at this point is to trade liquid staking tokens, and now the newer kid on the block, new liquid risk staking tokens, all of which draws their value from the Ethereum blockchain, the Eigenlayer protocol, which is deployed on the Ethereum blockchain and designed to, at least for now, there's only one AVS, and designed to validate consensus and provide consensus services to other blockchains and things like that, right? So currently, that's what we have on Tezos, and that's what we have, in fact, on any of the other blockchains, with rare exceptions. What we're trying to do, both for Tezos and for Etherlink, is to actually bring apps that would correspond more to something that I would call finance on chain. And it can be DeFi, and it can be something that derives their value or their interest or like their use case from trading things that take their value on chain, wrapped Bitcoin, wrapped Ether, Tez, things like that. Or those can be things that actually are linked to your real activity in the real world. Because the real world, whether we like it or not, is still much, much bigger than what's happening on chain. Hard to believe when you follow Twitter every single day, but that's actually true. And so at the end of the day, where we see really the growth relay and things that we could do with Etherlink in particular, but Tezos as well going forward, is first making a bridge and a possibility for everything that has been done so far to be done on Etherlink. And that's in particular true from the go, thanks to an L1, L2 bridge being designed by LP Labs as we speak, and they're almost done actually, where like any FA 1.2, FA2 token from Tezos will be able to be bridged to Etherlink. And actually, Etherlink by itself being a layer 2 is actually a bridge in itself, if you actually understand what a layer 2 really is and a roll-up. So that's very, very secure. and that's convenient. It's nearly free, and it allows you to bridge them over and use that value for various things, whether you want them as collateral for a money market, whether you want them as things that you can trade within a DEX on Etherlink, for example, which you can already do, to be fair, on Tezos, and things like that. Things that are going to be easier to do in the short term on Etherlink compared to Tezos are things related to user onboarding, user experience, and especially around account abstraction. We can reuse a lot of the heavy work. We're standing on the shoulders of giants here on that front, by Alchemy, by ThirdWeb, by those guys that I mentioned before, and Ethereum themselves, and so on, in how we can, and some of that is being done on Tezos as well, just to be clear. But with a one-step, one-click deployment solution, being able to create an app, like what Friend.tech was an early pioneer of, where you can log in with your Google account or whatever. An account gets created for you in the background, and that account is self-custodial. No one has access to your keys and so on. And then people are able to start using the applications that has spun up that smart account for you, and they will even pay the gas for you for a short amount of time, or maybe forever, depending on the gas prices and what the app actually is. So there is this feature called Paymaster, where essentially, just with that one-click solution that you're able to launch right now on ThirdWeb as we speak on Etherlink, you're able to spin up an account for your users based on their oaths from Google or Facebook or Twitter or Netflix, and then have them interact with some things on chain without a single gas token in their wallet. And that's just one example, but there are a number of features like that are just made easier simply because we have access to that EVM tech stack. Now, it doesn't mean that the Tezos blockchain won't evolve going forward, and we're working on two specifically large projects around this. I guess I can disclose one and the area around it, which is a stable coin that will be yield bearing. And that thing has been famously difficult to do in the past, and it won't escape anyone's attention that USDT, the Tether one, and USDC, the Circle one, are not paying yield. And there is a clear reason for this. It's because if you're paying yield, you're considered a security token. And that security token has a bunch of potential consequences that are not great if you're not ready to face the legal framework around those. And we've been working with two partners, especially one that has actually cracked that thing, done it in a way that is fully compliant, especially in Europe and the US, which are two important markets. And that thing, will come on Tezos, but will be obviously usable on Etherlink as well, via that L1, L2 bridge that I was talking about. And as soon as you get to Etherlink, and I'm going to go slowly here because it's fairly technical, but it's important for people to sort of realize, and that might preempt and answer a bunch of the other questions that people have later on. Let's say you have that stablecoin, let's call it EUSD, for Etherlink USD or whatever the E stands for, Electronic USD, Enshrined USD, whatever you want. That EUSD lives on Tezos. It's native to Tezos. It's minted on Tezos, okay? It's backed off-chain by some sovereign money markets, some ETFs issued by BlackRock or Fidelity or some others. And essentially, those guys who have minted that stablecoin can bridge the stablecoin from Tezos L1 to Etherlink L2. Right? They use the bridge, whatever, that's fine. The stablecoin now lives on Etherlink. What you have on Etherlink, it's called the lock and mint model, where you have locked the stablecoin on the Tezos side in a Tezos smart contract, and you have minted a receipt, a representation of that stablecoin on the Etherlink side. Now, on the Etherlink side, that contract, you can put whatever you want in it. In particular, us as the operators of the bridge can put a lot of things in it. And one of those things is the OFT standard, which stands for Omni-Chain Fungible Token Standard, which makes it compatible and usable within the Layer 0 framework. And so in particular, what that allows you to do is you can send a cross-chain message using the Layer 0 pipes. And Etherlink has an endpoint from Layer 0. They're a strong partner of ours. I literally speak to those guys every single week. And as a result, it means that not only is that stablecoin usable on Etherlink, but it's usable on every chain where we would have enabled it within the layer 0 ecosystem. So every chain that has an endpoint like the Etherlink one will be able to do that. So we have to sum up on that particular topic, we have a stablecoin, which is yield bearing by default. Every single day at midnight or something like that, it will pay you the yield. And that stablecoin is native to Tezos. So the Tezos L1 has a very strong new application, if you want to call it this way, or piece of infrastructure or something. And that piece of infrastructure, through that L1 L2 bridge that we get quote unquote for free by virtue of Etherlink being a rollup, gets us not only access to Etherlink and our own ecosystem on Etherlink, but actually access to Arbitrum One, to OP Mainnet, to Base, to Binance Smart Chain, and so on and so forth. So I guess I took a particular angle on that question, but let me know if that sort of answers the initial question or not really.
Yeah, you went into a lot of detail there, and thanks for that. I think it does answer that question, but let us know if it doesn't for you guys. If you have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments as well. So I guess we'll move on to the next one. So this question asks, in what ways can the Tezos community contribute to the growth and success of DeFi on the platform?
That's a good question. Is that related to Etherlink or both Tezos and Etherlink?
Just the Tezos ecosystem as a whole, I suppose.
So like obviously we have a community to start with. That community is strong and has features that are fairly unique to our ecosystem. There are a number of things, but I think we tend to talk a lot more about technical, fairly highly technical details than some of the other ecosystems out there. Which can be both a strength and a weakness if we don't manage it properly. We tend to have people that are not as, I mean, if you look at the Etherlink Discord, they are quite degen at this point, but are not as, like purely focused on like, let me make a quick penny on this and then move on, and are actually more interested in where this thing all goes, how are we making that, and by that I mean the entire industry and that technology and that ecosystem actually useful. And not only on flipping tokens. So if you want to flip tokens, yes, you'll definitely have that both on Tezos and Etherlink going forward. And I'm doing a lot of hard work for you guys in the background at this point, where I forked by myself a UniV3 concentrated liquidity DEX for you guys to enjoy in the short term, while we get a better team out there with a solution that is more bulletproof and more future proof. And that team, in particular, CodeFi, is working on a very innovative central limit order book, AMM spot DEX. So it's a lot of words here, but essentially what that means is it's a spot DEX that allows you to go from one token to the other, but a spot DEX that uses all of the features that are now more and more doable on chain with an order book where literally you have some bids being submitted, you have some asks and some offers, and those are actually matched fully on chain, which is something that is fairly new. I see one comment from Uzi in the chat right now, which makes me laugh, by the way. 5 years late, guys, really? Yeah, 5 years late in some ways, but not really. First DeFi summer was 2020, so it was only 4 years technically, I'd like to say. But also at the end of the day, a ton of things that have been updated in the Ethereum ecosystem, and Ethereum is updating again, because on the 13th of March, which coincidentally is the start date of the Etherlink beta, they're also doing their Denkun upgrade, which makes on-chain activity on their layer 2s cheaper. So what did we need, and why are we not 5 years late, really? If you look at really the use cases that will link to the real world, will be much more interesting to a normal user and not a really intense user like myself, actually, chasing the airdrop on every single ecosystem for like no other reasons than their own bottom line and so on. Basically, we now have, with Etherlink and some others in the ecosystem, let's be honest, a very cheap platform that is both cheap, fast, and secure. And so security is relative, and there is some censorship at the very beginning, because at the very beginning we'll have only one node possible, but later on, progressively, we'll have a trusted execution environment with several nodes and MEV protection from the get-go, and things like that. So it's relative, and it will take about 3 months or so to fully mature. But at this point, and within 1 month's time, maybe we can just take a tiny bit of time and celebrate that. We'll have within the Tezos ecosystem a native enshrined rollup that will allow us to have a block time that is very short. You click on the UI, and for most users, it will look instant. You'll get an answer, you'll get a visual cue. You finally traded your degen token for test token, and you've clicked 500 milliseconds ago, and here's the answer, and here's what the pre-confirmation that the sequencer is giving you looks like. That's very usable, and that can lead us to a ton of new use cases that even Solana and Sui and the various layer 2s of Ethereum using centralized or single node sequencers are having as well, which are just happening as we speak. I'm talking about that central limit order book that Dimitri and the team at CordFi are working on. That central limit order book, until literally 6 months ago, was not doable on any chain. And why is that, right? So you're doing a central limit order book, essentially for the end user. If Jeff wants to trade out of some new tokens for some test tokens, he goes out there, he puts his 1,000 new tokens in the sell section, and he's gonna buy. But in the background, what's going on? That's going to be what's called a market order, and that market order needs to go into a huge list of orders currently being submitted to the blockchain and to that smart contract on the blockchain for matching. And then someone else, coincidentally, or because they're a market maker and that's their job and that's what they do for a living, will be against you, and will have a dynamically adjusted order that will get matched with yours in a fraction of a second. That's something that, that is what the Nasdaq, the NYSE, the London Stock Exchange, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange do every day on a daily basis with a very optimized centralized database. That is now something that we can do for relatively cheap and relatively fast on the blockchain. And that's not being 5 years late. That's something that is brand new, including on ecosystems like Arbitrum and Sui and Solana for some specific reasons have happened in the second part of last year. So that's one example, and I can give you quite a few of those examples of why we have that 0 to 1 sort of phenomenon, as Peter Thiel would call it, where having such cheap gas fees make it possible not only for the app operator to potentially pay them for you. If it's 1 cent per transaction and we expect each user to do 2-3 transactions a week, maybe we just want to put that in as part of our customer acquisition and pay those fees for the users. That's what a bunch of VC-funded startups are doing and working on at this point. And I strongly believe that this is the future, at least for apps with lower value being transferred. And in some ways, loyalty apps that some of the biggest brands in the world are working on at the moment, things like that, So to be honest with you, I forgot what the question was, but I hope it answers part of the question.
Yeah, you definitely covered a lot. I think you did answer the question. But yeah, let's move on to the next one. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think perhaps you can go into a bit more detail. So is enhancing user experience and accessibility for DeFi products to reach a broader audience a particular focus of yours? If so, what steps are you taking to achieve that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll give some precise examples of what we're doing and what our thesis is on this going forward. So maybe I'll start with a broad point. Essentially, if you look at every single cycle that we've had in recent years, and even 2013 to some extent, Bitcoin was a real innovation back then and was getting noticed by the market as digital gold. But let's put that aside. You've had, broadly speaking, they follow the Fourier cycles that everyone knows at this point. And you've had 2017, the first real bull cycle around smart contract blockchains. We were born out of the cycle. Ethereum was largely born out of that cycle, you could argue. Cardano and so on. And then you had 2021. And then we're in the middle of 2025. For some reason, that one is a bit front-loaded, a bit more so even than the 2017 one. I hope that's not worrying, and I hope it continues strong until 2026. But it does seem a bit front-loaded. But anyways, all of those cycles have had something in common, And that one will be no exception. Every one of them coincided with a very strong innovation in the space. 2017, unfortunately at this point, because we know it went sideways at some point and so on, but was the period of the ICOs, right? So ICOs were new and shiny. Everyone was doing an ICO on Ethereum, etc. It became really, really big, and it finally died with the ones that will go in the records as the biggest one, I'm pretty sure, EOS, in June or July 2018, raising 4 billion or some insane amount of money. So that was ICOs, and that was a real innovation, enabling you to raise money on chain without those massive sort of rigidities and constraints that are associated with raising money in quote unquote the real world. Okay. And that was not the only innovation, but to be honest, that was kind of the main one. In 2021, you had two actually. You had DeFi with DeFi Summer in 2020. Compound super launched that trend with launching that token as an incentive component and making it a farm token. You had that ability because of some innovation on Ethereum at that point to do it in a way that was not too cumbersome, and gas fees on Ethereum back then were quite cheap. And what were some very early examples of this with Ether Delta, which was a very early example of DEX, and Etherland, which became Aave afterwards, became really real, got product market fit with Compound, with my Uniswaps themselves later on, and with pretty much any of the food tokens and the food applications that we got that went a bit bonkers, but were interesting for a lot of users. And that was one example of this and an innovation. And then the other ones that really supercharged it and that we benefited massively as part of Tezos, is NFTs. NFTs really had their time in the sun, really had product market fit. People thought they were super cool. And people who were not pure crypto people actually got into crypto and into blockchain and stuff and into trading on chain because of this. So there was also, I have to say, because people might mention that later on, IDOs, which are the equivalent of ICOs, initial coin offerings that were off-chain and done in a very amateurish way, that morphed slowly but surely into initial exchange offerings on centralized exchanges and initial DEX offering, decentralized offerings, for the 2021 bull run. And that was especially strong on the Binance Smart Chain, with PancakeSwap and various launchpads there. That was a clear driver of that cycle. And then you had a bunch of other things built around it, right? But the main thing was those two things, in my opinion. Now, for 2025, if I'm honest, right now, you don't really see what is about to launch the next bull cycle. We're in the middle of it. A lot of people in technical analysis and stuff identify those cycles with three legs. You have the first leg of the bull, the second leg of the bull, and the third leg of the bull. I think right now we're in the middle of the second leg of the bull, which typically is a lot more jumpy than the first leg and especially the third leg. We haven't seen those jumps just yet, but I do think we're in the second leg. What this means in general, the second leg of the bull in the 2020-2021 bull run was right before Avalanche went bonkers and did 30 or 40x in 1 month. And that's typically where we're supposed to be right now in that cycle, except that, to be honest with you, I just don't see what this innovation on-chain is currently that could lead to a major token, doing a 30x, 40x. I'm not the only one saying that. If you look at Bankless, if you look at Coin Bureau and so on, they're also quite puzzled and they're not sure what that innovation is for that cycle. What I think that could end up being, but I have no idea, right? Is that accessibility, to get back to your original question, making what we already have with what is quite mature in Tezos, in Solana, in EVM and Ethereum, much more accessible. Right now, we have 1 million on-chain active users. If you looked at who does those quests on Layer 3, on Galaxy, and so on, it's about 1 million active users. It's absolutely nothing. Those users are super expensive to acquire. I'm one of those. I'm sure a bunch of people on the call are one of those. Essentially, one thing and one thing only interests me in that, it's making money. And I go out there and I try to pump my bags by going into after various airdrops and stuff like that. It's interesting, but I mean, it has its limits and it's extremely circular without real value added, in my opinion, at least for now. So that's something that, like, can lead to something. And obviously, like those American VCs spending enormous amounts of money incentivizing users and user acquisition on those protocols have something in mind. And that something in mind is how do we bring the normies or normal people on chain, right? And a lot of people are hard at work on this. And in fact, the people that were pioneers of like doing things off chain for crypto are helping us here and trying to move in that direction. If you look at what Binance have been working on in the last year and a half, really, they've been working on, like, right now they have that Binance Web3 wallet, which is directly accessible from the Binance.com front end. And that thing, like, is not doing super well, and, it's going to take some time and so on. But essentially, everyone is trying to become a gateway to DeFi, gateway to on-chain activity. And that thing will eventually work, whether it's through an MPC facilitated, setup and product that is being pushed heavily by Fireblocks and their competitors. Fireblocks calls it wallet as a service, or whether it's through a pure account abstraction, and it remains to be seen which standard will win. Is it ERC 4337, EIP 6900? I have no idea, but one of those will solidify. The community will coalesce around one clear standard, and we'll be able to go forward with this in a way that is super usable for someone who, frankly, doesn't care about what's behind it, even what blockchains are using, to be completely honest. You've seen that very example of this, very early example of this with friend.tech, the various .techs, post.tech, and so on Base. You've seen that with blackbird.xyz, which is a really cool app available only in New York for now, but I think they're launching in Los Angeles in not too long, where essentially you go and you eat at a restaurant, and by essentially doing some advertisement for the restaurant and creating a community around it and so on, the restaurant will, like, in a very roundabout way, subsidize you eating at that restaurant, and you can actually do that without even knowing what a wallet is. And that is super cool, and that's account abstraction, right? So those things, I think, could be the innovation for that cycle, which is not, like, on paper as exciting as what NFTs and DeFi Summer brought, but actually a lot more useful if you think about it. Because if we go, like, in the last cycle at the top, we had about 5 or 6 million people on chain, and let's be honest, most of those users were on Binance Smart Chain. So, interesting, but very limited. They were there to participate in some launch pads. They wanted to, do some NFTs and stuff like that. That's fine, but that's kind of limited. A lot of people lost money and got burnt in the process. And actually, out of the 5-6 million that were on chain in the last cycle, apart from the 1 million remaining, I'm just not sure that they're going to be back on chain anytime soon. However, the guys that could be on chain without truly going to MetaMask, making their seed phrase, making sure they keep it in 3 different places, that people who know where they are in case they pass away or whatever, like, all of those things that we associate with being on chain. If you don't have to do that, and you have a very clear and very clean social recovery feature, and maybe you can log in with authentication with Google and Apple, so that if you're locked out of your Google account, you go with your Apple account, and all of those things that are being refined as we speak. Maybe that's actually the innovation for this cycle, and we make a ton of transfers of value, and in various contexts, very, very usable and very, like, no brainers and easy to use going forward with the tools that have been developed in the last really the last year and a half or so on the account abstraction front, and on the middleware front for Third Web, Alchemy, Moralis, a bunch of the others who have been working on this. So that's essentially, like, our thesis, I would say, in a nutshell, but I've been speaking for like what looks like 2 hours, and I've put that in the goals on, for example, the accelerator I'm running from the 15th of April in Singapore, 2 weeks in person in Singapore, the rest 4 weeks remote, with that whole idea of having, like, very usable DeFi applications. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to add in the chat for the audience here the link to that incubator in case anyone is interested. Applications are open until the 31st of March. So let me put that in the chat, because that's something very concrete that we are doing to boost not only DeFi, but finance on chain, both on Tezos L1 and Etherlink L2. So I've posted the link in the chat for that AMA, and whoever listens to the replay and is a current listener can have a look. And you guys are like happy to answer any DMs if you have questions, and happy to give you more details on this. We're really keen. We've got some strong applicants already, and out of those 5 teams that we want to take part in this, we're going to have some good apps resulting from this.
That sounds super exciting, and I completely agree with you on the abstraction side of things being not only potentially the next step, but something the whole space has been waiting for a long time. It's been one of the biggest complaints about the space, just everything being too difficult to grasp from a wider audience perspective. And yeah, I think it won't only be a game changer for this next leg, if there is a next leg, but for the space long term, really. But we do have a question in the comments from Dylan Kowalek. I apologize if I've pronounced that incorrectly. Is the Tezos EVM implementation still planned to launch this year? I think you're referring to Etherlink, and I believe so. But yeah, Nico, perhaps you could go into more detail there.
Yep. So the Tezos EVM implementation. So actually, that's the right way to phrase that question. But let me precise it a bit. So it's our own EVM implementation within the context of Tezos. So we didn't do the EVM implementation ourselves. We used an implementation that had been done in Rust previously called Sputnik VM, I believe, and we baked it into our own solution with and we did every single part of the stack, what we call the Etherlink kernel, the various bits that are needed for a sequencer, and really like several nodes on the sequencer to run a privileged party for that EVM implementation, as you call it, within the context of Tezos rollups. And all of this is launching as part of a product. So not only is it an implementation that is open source and that everyone can check on the Etherlink.com organization on GitHub, but in fact, it's also a product that we're launching as a community rollup called Etherlink. So that's a bit of jargon and all, but hopefully you guys get it. Essentially, Etherlink is a blockchain in itself. It does happen to inherit its security from the Tezos layer 1 and the strong set of bakers that we have, long-running bakers, and the bakers can vote and can choose to the various upgrades to the Etherlink kernel, which is part of the Tezos code base, okay, Tezos blockchain code base. Okay, so now enough for the technicalities and what is happening later this year and why should we be excited and what is the opportunity for anyone who is a builder on that call. And I see that Kevin is on the call and that some other people I recognize who might be looking to build. Essentially, the whole idea here is for Etherlink to be launched as a beta launch mid-March. Okay, so that's very soon now. That's about a month's time. Essentially, East Denver is happening next week. And then soon after, we'll have the launch of Etherlink. So that launch of Etherlink, you can think of that beta launch as a quote-unquote low-key launch. Okay, why do I see it this way myself? And full disclosure, I used to run the Etherlink project. So like this is also like a choice that we made all of us combined at Nomadic Labs, at Trilitech, and so on. And why is that the right way to go according to us? Because we have a launch that is low-key, where like people start getting familiar with the EVM toolchain and stack if they're coming from the Tezos ecosystem and they're mainly Michelson builders. We have people getting familiar with the Tezos way of doing things on the EVM side if they're coming from the Solidity and EVM world, as they've been on Arbitrum 1 before and things like that. And essentially, that's sort of an onboarding phase, more for like people who are behind the scenes, like the builders, the partners who would like use the chain within their stack for various apps or various use cases and things like that. Obviously, at that time, users will also get access to the chain and will be able through, I'm hoping Ruby Wallet fairly soon, but from the get-go, from MetaMask and so on, to get access to the chain. They can actually, right now, if they're interested, have access to the testnet and use my own DEX that I've deployed, Iguana DEX on there. There's going to be also other testnet versions of protocols, one of which is being worked on at this point by the Plenty team, which is a money market, and some others that are like now that the graph is finally going to be online, going to be launched, because we needed the graph for subgraphs for UIs to be fully doable in a normal way. And Subsquid is also another subgraph provider. But essentially, all of the tools are in place infrastructure-wise, so that on mid-March, when the beta launch is happening on Etherlink, for people who are builders to be able to build, and then for users to actually have a blast, no pun intended with blast and so on, have a good time using the various projects and the early versions of those projects. So in particular, on the infrastructure side, for the builders who might be listening to us, we'll have oracles, so both Redstone Classic, Redstone Core. Redstone Classic is very similar to what you would have had if you've used Chainlink oracles in the past. Redstone Core is very similar to Peace Network oracles, which are also called pool oracles. We will have Peace Network itself, which is also pool oracles. They pioneered that technology. Very strong tech. We will have, so those would be necessary for any money market like Aave or Compound, for any perpetual platforms, derivative platforms that are Oracle based, like GMX or Gains Network or things like that. We will have subgraphs, as I spoke about. Subgraphs, for anyone who wouldn't be familiar with the terminology, were pioneered by a decentralized network called The Graph. The Graph is really outstanding tech. I've been a long-time user of their technology. They are coming and they will be live on the testnet very, very soon, and on the mainnet hopefully by mid-March. Where like essentially, because the blockchain is quite hard to interact with, that is true for Tezos, that is true for Ethereum, and as a result, that's true for Etherlink, which implements the very classic Ethereum specifications for an API with an RPC endpoint, etc. That RPC endpoint is quite clunky. It's not made to be super usable for UI or anything like that. And as a result, typically, 99% of apps out there use a middle layer to be consumed by their UI. And that middle layer is a subgraph that uses quite fancy type of API called GraphQL APIs that were created by Facebook, Meta, a few years ago. And that GraphQL API is much more usable, allows you to do a lot of things easily at the UI level and to have very cool, very snappy UIs that you wouldn't have otherwise if you were querying the RPC endpoint straight away. And it would also be very expensive to query those RPC endpoints repeatedly like that. So as a result, those subgraphs are super key and they will be there from the get-go, both from the graph and another provider and partner of ours called Subsquid. And then you'll have other infrastructure partners like, Block Scout, which has been super helpful, has enabled us to very quickly spin up an explorer that works remarkably well for Etherlink. Right now, it's live for the testnet, and the URL is testnet-explorer.etherlink.com. A bit of a mouthful, but it's referenced on the etherlink.com portal. You also, and essentially, you have a bunch of partners that are coming up, and those partners, including node providers and so on, will be live and will be operational from the mid-March beta launch. And then for users out there who would want really cool apps with liquidity deposited by the foundation, by other partners of ours, and by you guys eventually, because it will be worth it and because the yields will be high enough for it to be worth it. Hopefully that gets going really, really hard by, I would say, if I had to guess, beginning of May or something like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if it happens even before that, whether it's on my own small decks that I will release Iguana decks, or on the money market that Plenty is working on, provisionally called Plan, but I don't know what they will call it, or others that we're actually making deals with to bring them to the Etherlink ecosystem, to bring their communities with them, and potentially some of their know-how around VM setups and account abstraction to have from the get-go early May or something like that.
Brilliant. I've realized I need to come and bug you in the office a bit more and learn a bit more about the wider DeFi landscape. There's been a lot of useful insight on this call, so thank you for that. Just to end, I know we'll come to the last minute. And for those of you who've just joined, you'll be able to listen back to this one once we're done. But Nico, what are you personally most excited about within the Tezos ecosystem about the progress we're making in DeFi? What excites you the most when you walk into the office and you're going to start your day?
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to finish the call. Basically, I'm a builder. I mean, my real background, historically, I'm a mathematician and I was a trader in traditional markets for 12 years at banks and investment banks and hedge funds and stuff. But that's never really excited me. What really excites me is the building. And the building right now, with what we've put in place on Etherlink, there's still some missing bits. And on Tezos, I'm working quite hard on making some small improvements that make a meaningful difference for people who are building on Tezos itself, and some actually like quite major improvements. But that's TBD and to be announced later because it's less ready, and I want to properly work on it before I talk about this. But for Etherlink itself, which is like the big thing for March because the launch is in March. Essentially, it's this ability to build and to just like see those applications that I know inside out because I've built so many of those on the Ethereum ecosystem before, and to see what you guys actually build, the community, whoever is listening to that call, come to us, come to my team, come to me, and we'll help you build. Whether it's in the context of the accelerator, whether it's giving you tips just of the record in any context, come to us at East Denver, set meetings with us. We're just open for business essentially, and that thing, like it's super easy to do. It's much easier to get started building than it was even a year ago. I mean, the amount of work that Third Web has done to make building a very trivial thing on EVM is just a game changer. Like even 2 years ago, I remember I was still using Truffle, Remix, all of those stuff that no one uses anymore because they're so much better. And that's really what's exciting about it. I think like my own imagination is like quite limited. I'm a technical guy and stuff, but with the amount of tools and infrastructure pieces that we're making available for you guys to do your thing, I mean, for sure, we've got to get to a point where we have one real app that people want to use, not because they want to get an airdrop, but because it's actually interesting, it gets there somewhere, it's useful, or it's fun, or both. So that's what I'm excited about. What is the killer app? When does it come, and who's going to make it?
Nice. I'm excited for that too. Thanks for joining, everyone. We're coming to the end of this space. I want to give a big thank you to you, Nico, for answering all of the questions and giving us all of your insight. I'm sure the community have loved it, and yeah, we'll be speaking again very soon. We should have a space again with yourself, Nico, and perhaps maybe one of our partners. So yeah, thank you all, and thank you, Nico.
Have a good one, guys. Thanks for tuning in.